afternoon. So this is just a quick, a little mini lecture slash a refresher of conflict. So if you're watching this before the vocabulary, then you'll have a better idea of specific examples of conflict. If you're watching this after the vocabulary, it's a review slash a little new thing. So obviously, with a literary conflict, remember it is a struggle between two opposing forces, or simply the problem. So a struggle that takes place in the character's mind or heart is called internal conflict. In is the key word, internal, which means it's inside of you. So, man versus self is an internal conflict. It is a conflict going on, obviously, inside oneself. So, for example, it could be a character struggling to overcome fear, addiction, emotional damage, or a crippling personal issue. So, when you identify an example of man versus self or person versus self, you're not going to say, uh, let's go with Walter versus Walter. You'll go with Walter versus his fear of the dark, or Walter versus his gambling addiction, or Walter versus um, a trauma in the past. So an external conflict is a struggle that takes place outside the body. External. So external, think of that. Think of if you're exploring, you're obviously outside. So man versus man is an example of this. It's the prime example. Two characters fight one another, like Harry Potter and He Who Shall Not Be Named. An external conflict is also can be man versus nature, which is struggle of a man against the outside forces of the world. So it could be something such as your environment or the weather or even animals itself. So this would be you have a frozen lake, which is kind of your environment. We have a snowstorm, and we have a dog in there as well. Man versus society is this is when a protagonist feels alienated or separated or treated as outcasts of society. It's one against many. So even though it says one against many, I want to remind you that this is strictly supposed to be pretty much what they stand for, not necessarily you versus a whole bunch of people physically. So bystander or the bully's next target. So this is kind of an example of person versus society, because are you going to stand up against bullying as a whole, or are you just going to let it happen? So you're standing up against bullying, not necessarily the bullies itself physically, but the actual action of bullying somebody. And finally, there's person versus supernatural and technology. So a supernatural being doesn't have to be like a ghost. It could be a villain that's a monster, or it's something that's outside of this world, that's not of this earth. So the key to this is out of this worldness. So it could be an alien is supernatural, a ghost is supernatural, even a lot of mythical creatures could be supernatural. So Casper the Friendly Ghost, supernatural. Technology could also be something. It's obviously related to technology. So you versus your phone, you versus robots, you versus a car.